Welcome. Today I'll be looking at the chart of a 2-4 emotional manifestor on the cross of explanation. Let's begin. So, I suppose starting the furthest away from the throat, I guess we're looking at split definition. So we're really looking at a root solar plexus separated with bridging gate 22 from an ego throat ajna connection. And so from the get-go, we're kind of looking at two very distinct personalities in one body. And, interestingly enough, the incarnation cross has the 2343 in it, which has definition from the ajna to the throat, but this is separate from the authority, which is root to the solar plexus. So what this means is, here's someone whose incarnation cross, whose purpose in life, whose outer authority is going to be kind of one side of their personality. And then their inner authority is not necessarily going to be connected to that. The solar plexus clarity is going to require bridging for it to reach the other section. So basically, I would tell this person to be very slow in your decision making. There's no need to choose quickly, to decide quickly. Give yourself all the time in the world. Give yourself time not only to get the solar plexus clarity, but also for that clarity to bubble up through bridging gate 22 and to connect to the rest of the chart. So that's the first point, find places to be private and public. Find places where you can be in other auras and you can get the bridging benefit. But because we're looking at a manifestor, ultimately it's going to be the times when gate 22 is activated that you're going to be able to have that flow of information. And it's going to be activated by transits. So manifestors, the transits are the most important. And a kind of secondary activation occurs from people. But because they have such a dense, repelling aura, the in-aura contact, while it is still important, and it's still kind of the general advice to find places to be private and public and so on is useful, you can also notice when gate 22 is active via transits. Right now, Neptune is in gate 22, and it will be for quite some time, as of June 2020 when this is being recorded. So, but besides that, you can look at, every 27 point something days, the moon goes through gate 22. So noticing that, adding it to your calendar, waiting until after that gate 22 activation to make a big decision might be useful. And of course, there's no guarantee that, the moon clicks into gate 22 and you somehow suddenly have clarity about things. But at the very least, when that happens, you're going to have the two disparate parts of your personality in communication together. So that's useful in and of itself. Okay, so for this reading, I have received an image, which I'll be sharing in the video, which contains the substructure information. And I really like it when I get that, because I don't always have time to generate the charts in Biomechanics, Advanced Imaging, MMAI. So it's really nice, if you're going to submit your chart to me, and if you want me to look at the substructure stuff, you can add that in there. It's fine also if you just send me birth time and so on. But because the substructure information is here, I am going to address it. So I'm going to kind of do an overview here. So I'm going to look at the substructure now. Okay, so starting with the 4 transformations, we have, let's see. Oh, interesting. I guess, okay, I'm not really familiar with the way these graphics are. I'm guessing that the color is the circle, because the pentagram would represent base because there are only 5 bases. So in this particular graphic, I'm going to assume the color is the circle. If it isn't, then I apologize, and hopefully this will be useful to somebody who has a 6th color digestive system. But the first thing we're looking at in the top left corner, top left variable, we're looking at a 6th color digestive system, and it is left variable, so that is direct light. So this is somebody who greatly benefits from eating during the day, from eating in direct sunlight, if possible. If not, you can get these things called SAD lamps for seasonal affective disorder, or sunlight or daylight lamps. You can eat under those. And essentially eating the food and really living the life in the diurnal cycle. Experiment with waking up at dawn. Experiment with going to sleep shortly after dawn, or after dusk, This left variable, very active brain system, an active immune system that can rapidly adjust, that can handle a lot of things. It's third tone, so the visual presentation is going to be important. Think of plating among chefs, how the food looks. And when picking out food, seeing, not in your mind's eye, not in your imagination, but actually physically seeing, scanning for the best fruit at the market. Doing it by sight, not by touch. People always touch the fruit at the market and so on. But here, this would be a theme of visually scanning for the right food to eat. And being left variable, it's going to be healthy for this brain system to do things like Sudoku and chess, and to kind of get a workout somewhat. Now, of course, the transference here, when this person is not following their authority, which is their emotional clarity, what they're going to do in transference, when they're not waiting for the clarity, they're going to decide based on the quality of the food, not on the time of day. For them, what's more important is the time of day, is the circumstances and the light and so on. And being synchronized to the daylight cycle is going to be very important for them. Now we see also the 6th color environment. So I would say for someone like this, it's crucially important. It's a very sensitive, 6th colors, the end of the line, so to speak. It's very, very sensitive in its own way. It's not sensitive to the food it eats in the way that a 1st color digestive system is, but it's sensitive to the circumstances. And as such, very sensitive to light. This is a subtle sensitivity. And then when we see that it's also a 6th color environment. Now I know this is right variable, artificial shores. So I know that some people with artificial shores are like, well, yeah, I can live in the city because it's artificial, right? Not really. 6th color, regardless of whether it's left or right variable, is a countryside landscape configuration. And you'll see that out in the countryside, the day and night cycle is so much more important. If you're in the city, you can't really tell the day and night cycle. There's so much hustle and bustle. The lights are on, in the city and so on. You're less in touch with the day and night cycle. So I would say it's very important for this person to live in the country. Now, of course, as I give this advice, and I have to give the caveat, which is kind of passé now, I hope, to practitioners of human design, but still bears mentioning that, the worst thing you can do is take all the advice and then, equipped with that, strengthen your mental decision making, right? And so I'm hoping to go into the not self here to really show what that mental decision making looks like so you can recognize it, because it's really easy to take a bunch of human design info and go, wow, now I know what I'm supposed to eat. Now I know where I'm supposed to live. I'm going to decide to only eat this and only do that and only live there, and, strengthen the mental side. And of course, that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to weaken the mental decision making from its kind of stranglehold grip on the bioform, so that, in this case, the clarity of the solar plexus can take over. That's what we're trying to do. That's the aim here. is to give this other intelligence system the power. But, nevertheless, it's important to know this information because it can help the mind, ideally, relax into surrender by going, okay, now I have a signpost. Now I see why I'm so comfortable in such and such place. So what is the sixth color, sixth tone environment? Well, it's artificial shore, as we know, which could be on the edge of town. It could be where the nature meets civilization. It could be an artificially demarcated place where, there's an airport outside of town and it's right next to the countryside, or there's a dam that separates different levels of water, and so on. The example of train tracks are often used, but I find that train tracks tend to be in town, and there has to be enough difference between the two for it to make a difference. People say, oh yeah, I'm in artificial shores. I live by the freeway. It separates the neighborhood. Well, kinda, but not really, right? It has to be a big enough difference. So real shores work too, especially if they're built up right to the shore. If you're out in the countryside and you're on the beach, and the beach is nature and the ocean is nature or the lake is nature, you're still just in nature. It's not as pronounced of an effect. This is about the liminal space. This is about the threshold. And you meet certain kinds of people on the threshold. The other thing is, with the shores, it's not really about where you are. It's about what's on the other side. It's about, does that stimulate you? Do you get this frequency of, wow, I'm like looking out, I'm on the hillside looking at the town and all those lives in town. And are you stimulated by that? The sixth tone is a touch environment. Textures would be very important. Leathers or velvets or, nice worn wood. Like when you put your hand on an arm of a chair and it's been worn down and it's smoothed. And also, have you ever been to those houses where you kind of walk through the house and you have to touch everything on the way? You have to squeeze by things to get through. There's ottomans and chairs and cushions and you're basically squeezing through the place. You're touching the environment as you move through it. That is a sixth color environment. Now, from here on out, we're actually right variable. So it's interesting. The mind is completely right variable. So what this means off the bat is, don't ever try to organize or understand information in the way that left variable people do. There's a lot of pressure on the right variable to organize things and to make sense of them in a way that you can easily retrieve them. Well, that's not what the right variable is about. That's what the left variable is about. The left variable is about organizing things so they're just right there and you can reach out and touch them. But the right variable is so deep. It's about taking things in a deep way that you might forget you even know that knowledge until, in a flow state, somebody pulls that knowledge out of you. That's the beauty of the right variable. So don't necessarily try to organize it. You will organize it in your own idiosyncratic way. You have to trust that that's okay. Trust that if you're fully immersed in an experience, for instance, even listening to me share this information with you, you don't have to take notes. Right variable doesn't take notes. Notes are all about points. This point to that point, to this point to that point. That's left variable stuff. Notes are about patterns. That's left variable stuff. The right variable, you just take it in. Just take it all in and trust that when you need it, it will be there. See, this is true love, true self-love, acceptance and surrender to who you are, not trying to be somebody else, not trying to be left variable. I'm very left, just like Ra. I have the same tone, color, line, the personality and design, sun and earth, and I also have 3 left variables, as he did. Although in his case, he was left variable environment, right view. In my case, I'm right variable environment, left view. But be that as it may, so much of human design is about strategies and about patterns and about logic. And there's good reason for this, because logic is what's really dependable and what's really reliable, and it can be very useful. But right variable people can be completely overwhelmed by human design. And it's not supposed to overwhelm them. And they can try, so hard to be strategic and to be pattern matching and to take things in a way that they think they're supposed to, because that's the way they were taught, because it's a left variable world out there. It's a 7-centered world that we've inherited. And it's the dawning or the emerging of the 9-centered world that we are ushering in as 9-centered beings. But even though we're 9-centered, we're still so heavily conditioned. And, as an example, myself with these 3 left variables, I'm very much a leftover of that 7-centered world, like Ra was. And you being a manifestor, the manifestor is a leftover too. So being a right variable manifestor is a little bit, anachronistic. The right variable is such a future-oriented consciousness, a receptive flow state consciousness. And the manifestor, well, they built the 7-centered world. Not themselves, but they directed it. It's their world. The manifestors were the pharaohs and the CEOs and the business moguls and the railroad tycoons and the mafia bosses and and on and on and on. But for myself, being so left, people assume, and this is, again, a leftover of the 7-centered thing, that I have vast knowledge. No, what I have is the ability to access the knowledge on demand. And the knowledge that I do have is like sound bites. It's like logical patterns. It's little formulas. It's not vast at all. The example that I give is, say I studied under Ra for 10 years, in person, in Aura. I would still only have what I have today, having never studied under Ra. Because the left variable process, my mind is fully left here, right? My personality sun earth, my personality nodes, left. The left variable process is to take the formulas. It's to take the patterns. And so whether Ra himself was giving me the patterns, or whether I was listening to the recordings, or whether, no matter what, I would basically end up with the same thing. And it's impressive, sure. People say, Jonah, you have a vast knowledge of human design. Well, it's not really vast, or at least it's not really deep. It's just that I have the formulas, I have the patterns, and I'm continuing to experiment with these patterns. And I can access them at will. So somebody says something and I go, oh, that reminds me of this. And I immediately draw the connection to something, right? And it's impressive. That's what the left variable process is. It impresses people, but here's what I'm trying to say. The right variable person, the right variable mind, like you have a fully right variable mind, may not have that same ability to access things at will. In fact, it doesn't at all. Instead, the information has to be pulled from you. It has to be in a flow state. It has to naturally occur without effort, without trying. And the other person is just as involved. See, I can spout off human design facts, for days into the void. But the right variable needs the other person to pull the information from it. Both parties are necessary here. And what I'm trying to say is, the left variable looks like it knows so much, but it actually knows an infinitesimal amount compared to the right variable. And so if you spent 10 years in the presence of Ra, out of that experience, you would have somewhere within you a distilled essence of who he was as a person. And this distilled essence would be like the equivalent of analog versus digital. the equivalent of having a piece of a hologram that contains the whole within it. A distilled essence from your experience that is incomparable in every way to the meager patterns and formulas of the left variable. See what I'm saying? So for right variable people, I'm always telling them, don't stress out about trying to organize everything you know. And don't stress out if you freeze up and you can't access the information inside of you. That just means you're not in a flow state. That just means the person you're with is not actively pulling the information out of you, because right variable is meant to be passive. And I know this, you're a manifestor, right? Manifestor is like the most yang there is, but yet right variable is yin. So you see how funny it is. I'm a left variable generator, I am meant to respond, and yet everything in my left variable brain system is going, be active, be active, be active. And you're a manifestor, but everything in your, well, at least 3 of the 4 in your case are right variable, meant to be receptive. So that's what self-love really means. Is self-love is, instead of trying to be left variable, loving what you got, which is this ability to take in experiences, to take in information, and to distill it to its essence. And you may not be able to access it, but with self-love, you can trust that you will have that information when you need it, that it will be there for you when it's needed, and when it's needed by others as well, because the mind is primarily for outer authority. I mean, that's its role. So looking at your view, it's also 6th color, and it's called the personal view, and with a 6th tone, which I believe is called acceptance. It's basically a tone of surrendering. It's with the 6th color view, I mean, there's a lot of 6 here in your chart. And you're really just meant to see things in their uniqueness, to see things, to completely surrender to things, to see them without comparison. The transference here is seeing things in a political way, seeing the world in terms of winners and losers. That's not for you. You're not supposed to see things politically. There's so much pressure to be political, to take a side. And that's good for most people. Most people need to take a side, sure. But not you. Not in the way you see, at least. Perhaps in what motivates you with your guilt motivation, yeah. But the way you see is unique. You're supposed to see the uniqueness. And so you can notice it. You can notice when it flickers, and when you start to, instead of seeing the situation in its uniqueness, seeing what's never happened before, what's totally different from everything else, instead, you see it as categories. You see it as winners and losers. You see it in a way where you're keeping track of everything, like with a point system. That is not for you. That's the transference. And finally, going on to motivation. With a guilt motivation, and with inner vision as the tone, or I believe what they call meditation on the personality side. This is a pondering, meditative, ruminating, philosophical guilt. It's not left variable guilt, like who's responsible? Oh, I'm responsible. Okay, what can I do? It's not like that. It's not the left variable thing that's always going, what can I do? Instead, it's not even guilt that necessarily leads to action. It's simply using that receptive mind to ponder what actions you could take, to ponder them. And it eventually bubbles up to the second line of your profile, being a 2-4, and that second line is going to be preparing for the call. So this is a pondering, meditative, introspective mind that's here to be motivated by what it can do. Hope is poison for you. The transference is hope. hoping something will change, hoping something won't change. Betting, gambling, all of that is not good for you. Instead, it's about recognizing what you can do in the moment and being motivated from that to really prepare yourself for the call. And then when you're called, that's when you can unleash your power as a manifestor to have impact. Manifestors can have tremendous impact. Just make sure you inform first, But, so this is we're looking at a chart for a manifestor, which is really this leftover of the seven-centered, and yet so much of the right variable. We're seeing a very receptive, flow state mind, flowing, diffuse perception. You're not meant to be focused in your perception of the world. It's meant to be diffuse and kind of peripheral, using your peripheral vision and taking things in peripherally. And the mind itself, 70% of the mind, that personality sun earth, is meditation. It's inner vision. It's turning away from the world. It's not really looking out at the world. It's looking in to the inner landscape. So we've done the variables. We've done the 4 transformations. So, there's so much that's possible in a human design reading. There's really so many places to go. You can look at the channels, and you can look at so many things. But what I really want to spend time on for this particular reading is the bridging gate. Because there's only one. And I love it when there's only one bridging gate. I love it because you get to see so clearly what it's like for an entire life to be organized around one thing. As not self, right? The true self, sure, it's many different things. But as the not self, it's all about gate 22. It's all about it. And it's amazing when you get to see this, how the single bridging gate becomes the focal point for an entire life. And it's all based around, if I can embody this, if I can possess this, if I can do this, if I can have this, if I can have the person who has this, if I can have the job that represents this, if I can live in a place that's like this, and this is going to be gate 22 for you. So what is it? The gate of grace, the gate of listening. One of the listening gates. The gate of, what is it really? It's a fear of silent treatment. It's a fear of not having anyone to listen to, anyone worth listening to. It's wanting to be a better listener. It's wanting to be graceful the way politicians are graceful. It's wanting to have social graces. It's wanting to be romantic, to be a poet, to be a songwriter. It's wanting to be the friend of animals. It's a lot of things. You can read about the 1222. And ultimately what you'll find is this is a life form devoted to that 22. Now what happens is, as you deepen into your experiment and as you live more truly as yourself, which is supported by eating correctly in daylight, by living outside of the city, out in nature, or on the edge of town, or in a transitional liminal place, by waiting for the emotional clarity, by noticing when that 22 is there in the transits, all of these things that facilitate the deepening surrender to allowing your form to make the decisions from its clarity. As you do this, that 22, your relationship to 22 will change. And ultimately, it's the split definitions who are here to teach the rest of us. I'm single definition. Help me out, please, to teach the rest of us how to relate to each other. And in your case, it'll be understanding the value of listening to each other, the value of romance, the value of poetry, the value of grace, of a gracefulness, a real dignity there as well. So that's kind of the wisdom potential of that bridging gate. But just because there's the potential doesn't mean it happens. It's most people who have this configuration will just spend their whole lives going, I can have peace if only I'm graceful. I can have peace if only I'm dignified. I can have peace if I'm a good listener. I can have peace as long as I'm poetic and romantic and all of these 22 things. And so most people who have this configuration are going to spend their whole lives kind of chasing that mirage in the hopes that it will bring them peace, if they're manifestors, that is. And that's not what brings you peace. It's not. So the surrender to the form and the surrender to the emotional clarity, that you'll be at peace with the decisions you've made. You'll come to find that peace, or to at least have that peace find you. And to be awake to what it really is to be in form, to be in your body. I mean, that's what peace really is. It's just loving yourself, loving your form, loving being in form. And as that happens, the gate 22 takes a totally different quality. It's no longer the thing you're chasing, like the moth to the flame. It's suddenly the thing you're observing. Who's a good listener and who isn't? Who's graceful and who isn't? Who's, who has this connection and who doesn't? There's so many dogs barking tonight. This is the channel of man's best friend as well. And you can research that on your own. You can look into that, about how this 1222 is one of the mammalian connections. Along with the 1762 and the 1949, and you actually have both of those. So here we have a real configuration of a friend to animals, a true friend of the mammals here. So there's many different ways we can go with it. There's many different things to explore. I mean, obviously, profile and the undefined centers and so much more. But I hope that at least this brief reading will give you some peace or some signposts for finding deeper peace through, to kind of recap, embracing that right variable nature, embracing that receptivity, noticing and developing a relationship with the transits, noticing when the sun goes into gate 22, noticing when the moon goes into gate 22, which happens, 12 or 13 times more frequently, and noticing when other planets are in gate 22, like right now with Neptune, and really being able to develop a relationship with the cosmos in that way. The other thing I would say is I recently revisited Ra's Manifestor signature talk. It's available on the Jovian archive. If you search signature series and love, you'll find it. And I almost wanted to recap some of what he said about the Manifestor, but it's really just better to get it from him because it's incredible. I've listened to it maybe 4 or 5 times now, and it had been maybe a year since the last time, and I listened again, and I was captivated. I couldn't do anything but pay full attention to it, and it was incredible. So I highly recommend Ra's Manifestor signature series, and it's free. It's free on the Jovian archive. And yeah, I'm going to see if there's any kind of parting comments. Unfortunately, I have to cut this one short today, simply because I've run out of time. But yeah, I would say, I guess I haven't really talked about your incarnation cross. This incarnation cross, of course, features the 4323. So your ability to explain yourself is going to be paramount. Ra also had this channel, and so it'd be interesting for you to maybe listen to Ra and how he breaks things down and how he splits them apart in a way that can be easily assimilated. And yet even he struggles. Certain times you see, there's always the dichotomy, the freak or the genius. And certain times you go, wow, what a genius. And other times you go, that's kind of weird. That doesn't really make sense. How does that work? Explain yourself. So there's a real need to explain yourself there. There's also all these opinions and details. It can always be a little tricky when you have two channels connecting the same two centers, because there can be a unnatural augmentation of each. The individual process is meant to be individual, and the logical process is meant to be logical. When you have a logical channel next to an individual channel like that, connecting the same two centers, they can interfere with each other. So it's something to be aware of, to kind of give each their due, that it's going to be important for you to be able to explain yourself and to explain ideas and so on, but it's also going to be important for you to be able to have that logic which is able to justify its opinions through evidence and skepticism and doubt and all of that stuff. The 4521, the money line, this is going to, often be pulled into dealing with other people's money problems and stuff like that. And then, of course, your solar plexus clarity comes through the 1949, and it's fully unconscious. So it requires quite a bit of surrender to that completely unconscious process of ratcheting. Something to think about here, this is the channel where jealousy comes from, and I've virtually never met a 1949 who's aware of being jealous. And if you are, great, because what ends up happening is they tend to not be aware of the jealousy, and because it's repressed and it's unconscious, it comes out in the aura, and then everybody around them gets jealous, and they're like, why are you so jealous? It's like, well, yeah, because you're emanating jealousy energy because you yourself have not gotten in touch with that part of you that is actually designed to be possessive, designed to possess the partner. I know jealousy is a real bad look now, and people, there's so much literature about how you shouldn't be jealous and so on, but for somebody with 1949, it's actually healthy for you to have a certain possessiveness. So, yeah, there are many different ways we could go with this. There's so much, of course, in human design, but unfortunately I'm out of time for tonight. However, if there are any particular areas that you'd like, you're a manifestor. I don't have to tell you. You can always initiate, shoot me another email, post a comment, and if I respond, then I respond. So I actually love the manifestor generator relationship. I really listening to Ra's talk on the manifestors, I was really realizing how much I value the manifestors in my life. Even though sometimes they frustrate me like everyone does, particularly when they make decisions that have a huge impact and so on. But other times, manifestors really can have a pretty profound effect on people's lives. And I have a lot of them in my life. And I've dated manifestors. My boss is a manifestor. One of my best friends is a manifestor. And it's interesting seeing the relationship to generators where, it's like knowing a pharaoh or something. It's like knowing somebody who's from this other time. And for you, having so much right variable, it's almost like you're out of time in some sense. Like your aura is this leftover of the most powerful, impactful creatures ever to exist on planet Earth, and yet the right variable that's so receptive. One of my favorite human design friends, Simon Jurjavchik, who's an incredible human design analyst, theorist, whatever you want to call it, thinker, beer. I every time I talk to him, he's quad right and he's a manifestor, and every time I talk to him, I just get so much value out of our conversations, and I just love it. And it can be so unexpected and just have such an impact. So yeah, and when you listen to Ra's, if you do listen to Ra's talk on the Manifestor Signature Series in Love, on the Manifestor Signature, that's, it really drives home how different the Manifestor is, how the Manifestor is not really at home in this world. There's nowhere they go that they're welcomed, and how much resistance they get from everyone. And people are constantly, it's like nothing's easy. People are constantly like getting in the way of the Manifestor and slowing them down and pushing them away and challenging them, and and it's really a lot. And so just remember that through all of that, that peace is possible, and that peace is always there through that awakening to being yourself in your body and being at peace. I think of the Maurice Blanchot. He was a great French writer and philosopher, and he said, even when I felt my life was breaking up, even in those moments, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but even in those moments of great turmoil and so on, I could sit huddled in the corner of a room with firm ground under my feet, and I could breathe and rest in gladness. And that's what I hope for you as a manifestor, to experience that peace. Thanks for listening.